The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joni Siegel, and this is the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. This podcast has been going for 5 years now, and we're into our 5th year. Sorry about that. We've been going 4 years plus. And our whole purpose is to shed a light on people who either have experienced the addiction pandemic and are doing something about it, or even some of those who haven't personally experienced it, but who have a perspective on it that maybe we've never thought about before, or people who are just doing something to help handle it. The addiction pandemic is not going to be handled by one person. It's not going to be handled by one rehab. It's going to be handled by all of us doing something to help. And so what we like to do is offer ways that people can help or get help if they need it, and also make sure that everybody knows that there is in fact hope in when someone is addicted to drugs or alcohol. I want to remind you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and please give us a good review, because then other people find us, and then more people get our message of help and hope. Today, we have an interview with a lady known as the Rah Rah Coach. So this is going to be fun. Her name is Patricia Love. She's a professional life coach, and she motivates and builds confidence in women who are struggling. And she has had her own issues and problems growing up, and we'll ask her to tell us her story. She also wrote a book called Seen and Unheard, and we'll hear more about that book, what motivated her to write it, and let's talk to Patricia Love. Patricia Love, thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today and sharing your story with us.
Oh, thank you. It's just a delight to be here, and whatever I can do to give hope to anybody out there that's listening and watching this, that's my goal.
Well, that's awesome. And I know we'll get to this, but I know you do that for a lot of people. So
Yes,
I'm excited to hear from you. But take us back to your childhood and what it was like. And I know you had a little bit of an addiction problem yourself, might have been a big one, I don't know. But tell us about that. Tell us how that whole got started for you.
Absolutely. As children, we learn what we live, right? And my mother was an alcoholic, and my father was a kind of an unemotional emotionally abandoning me, basically. And it's again, he was always gone. So basically I was the third child, the youngest of three. But there was several years between myself and my brother. So I pretty much grew up on my own, but there was no inspiration, no encouragement, no rules, you might say, the gathering of how to do something,
should I just say parenting?
Yeah, that would be kind of it,
like no parenting.
They just knew their own. They only knew what they knew. And my mom being an alcoholic, she was pretty much always wanting me to get out of the way. So so she could drink or do what she wanted to do. And then my dad was never around. And so in him being so unemotional, I grew up, just to give an example, I grew up in this family that when I would get birthday cards from him, even at any age, young age, it would be happy birthday, Mr. Jack M. Love. Not dad, not anything, but it was just very much like that. And so for me, it was always trying to get his love and also get my mother's love, but I didn't really know how to do that. And what my dad did is he tried to buy me things to give me love. So this is what I learned. And when I say that, is the behaviors for me, these all became learned behaviors of lack of love, buy things for people and they'll love you. And just being, and my mother was she was meek, you might say. And so she was, again, seen and not heard in a lot of ways. And that, especially in those times. But when you grow up like this on your own, by yourself, not encouraged, you just don't know what to expect. And so when you get to the teenage and the young years, adult years, you haven't got the tools. At least I didn't have the tools to move forward and to do things. And this led me down the road kind of a rabbit hole, you might say. And it just got worse and worse until later on that I had to do something about this. But it was definitely a hard road. But at the time, I didn't understand it. Like most people, right? We don't understand what we're in and what it is until something really major happens, maybe. And then, even then, you don't always know. You
Right.
don't
Well,
always
and
know.
you don't know that there's another way. That's all you
Yeah,
know.
that's all you know. And so you don't have another way. Especially if you're not given the tools. If you're not given the tools, then you just don't know. And so it led to me being not that good in school. It led for me to be kind of a, a rebel. Um, it led me to try to manipulate my father and how to get his love, which again, in turn, I learned manipulation in a lot of ways down the line. And again, unintentionally, but this is how I got my father's love, at least I believed I did, was because I knew he was a salesperson. So I decided to read these books about sales to get his attention. And this is what I was always trying to do, along with my mother's attention, which I couldn't get either. So it was just one of those kind of different things that it was a hard road until, and then in my 20s, it just kind of, I got raped twice. Once by a stranger, and then once by a boyfriend and then I ended up in the hospital. And these are also very traumatic, right? But I stuffed a lot of my emotions into what I call my baggage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was taught to be tough, taught to be strong, don't cry, get over it. And so that's what I tried to do, is toughen it up. But that it takes a toll on you, on your emotions and on your behaviors, because you stick them all in a suitcase, right? And you carry that baggage around with you. And at some point it's going to explode if it's not acknowledged.
Right. Patricia, were you aware when you were little that your mom had an alcohol problem?
No, that
No.
was the interesting,
Okay.
that was what was so interesting about it. It was just, I didn't know till I was almost 19, because a lot of all alcoholics are not the same, just like not all substance abusers or anything are the same, right? And she was a closet alcoholic. She would drink when a lot of people weren't around. She had to take blood pressure medicine. So I thought that was just maybe she was acting odd because of the blood pressure medicine. But I know that in my intuition is I never wanted to bring any friends home.
Mm.
I didn't want them to see her. So again, I was like, oh no, let's go to your house. Or even though I didn't find out till I was 19, almost 20 years of age, that she was an alcoholic. And that's when she literally had her breakdown.
And did she get help? Did she get better?
Well, she, again, it's interesting. Back in the day, this would have been in the, let's see, late 60s, early 70s. They went into a hospital to go through withdrawal. Well, my dad, of course, this was just not the thing to do. This was like faux pas. Don't tell anybody that she got through this or was an alcoholic. That was like, oh my God, this should never happen. And so he sent us off because he had some money, I thought, and he sent us off to a trip. I was with my sister for like 3 to 4 weeks to get my mother healed before she came back. So we were kind of her caregivers for those 3 or 4 weeks so that she could get better, supposedly, because he didn't want to be around that. Now, needless to say, while he was doing that, I actually realized that he was actually philandering around. So
Oh,
there's a lot of different things that came into it, which again brings, for your father, you find out your father is doing some of this stuff because you find out as you get a little older on these things. And that also, it hits you in the wrong way. And it's like you idolize this person and everything starts to fall apart. So it's a rabbit hole, and you kind of fall down into it. And when you're not getting what you want, and from this, you try and look for it in different places. So what I was doing was going into, it was getting really addicted to behaviors, to sexual behaviors, finding guys just to have sex to make them love me, because I thought that was what love was, especially after you get raped. You really have no self-worth. Your self-esteem has gone down the tube. So a lot of fractions in there that really take part in a lot of this. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I can imagine that when you're not getting the love at home, you want to find it somewhere else. Now, did you have your own drugs, alcohol problem? Did that at some point play into this scenario?
Interesting enough, I had a lot of behavioral problems, which sabotaged my life. Now, there was definitely uh, abuse in drugs and in alcohol, because when I was on the high, everything seemed to be good. Everything was flowing well, making money, doing well. But as soon as I sabotaged myself, which I did all the time, would fall into this negative space, the alcohol and the drugs would come into play because I wanted to mute everything.
Right.
And so, and of course, I thought of it at the time was just having fun. And so I definitely abused it very heavily. And I know there's several different areas of addictions. And I think in some ways I kind of was on a very fine line of not maybe going completely into the total possession, addictiveness of it all, but I was on the road there. I was on the road there. And so because everybody's slightly different in their body makeup and everything. So in some ways I kind of got sick, but I abused it. I totally abused it, and used risky things involved in it. So I was definitely going down a very, very, very bad path. Because during my 20s, it was definitely sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you might say. And even into my 30s. And, it's interesting, people get highs and lows, right? And, I'd meet a guy and I'd get on a real high. And maybe that would last for even a year or something like that. And then everything falls apart. So you kind of go back to your old ways. And it's almost like being on a hamster wheel that you just keep going and going and going. And you keep doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same results. So the behaviors were very, very negative. And then along with the drugs and the alcohol, which again, I would just constantly want to just make everything go away. And yeah.
Right. And I think the hamster wheel, as you call it, I think that also kind of describes what people go through with drug addiction and alcohol addiction, where they obviously decide that they want to get clean and get sober, but then something happens. And so then they feel they have to get high, and it kind of
Yes.
becomes this revolving door.
It's a trigger. You get
Yeah,
triggered.
exactly. So in terms of your life, and so now you're in your 30s and still kind of doing the sex, drugs, and rock and roll?
Still pretty much doing a lot of that, always working, and getting jobs and doing well. It was kind of like I was, what do they call it? A functional alcoholic drug
Right.
addict in a lot of
Functioning
ways.
addict. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
functioning addict.
Yep.
Because it's a fine line. I was being selective. That still didn't mean I wasn't addicted. I was being selective. And of course, I'm thinking at the time, yeah, I'm good at this. I can handle all of this, right? And until the downs happen, like, you get married. I married the love of my life, I thought. My fantasy of who I fell in love with when I was 16 and he was 19, and I ended up marrying him. So I was on a big high. And then a couple of years in, I realized that I'd made a mistake. I missed all his red flags because I was muted in my own mind. And so again, started leading me down to not only sex and drugs, but also financial problems, because I was never taught how to deal with finances. So I was really pretty good at making money, but I was really good at spending it.
Mm.
And so everything was a high and a low, which, when you're addicted to things or abusing things, that's what it is. It's a high and a low. And so you think that, you're just waiting for the next high. And then you think you can get through it. And yet you're not doing anything about it. And that's what I wasn't doing. I wasn't doing anything about it. I was just dealing with it every single day. And, because when I was on a good roll, I'm like, oh, I'm fine. But when a bad roll hit, I was really bad. And so it was just a constant, like you said, a revolving door, hamster wheel constantly. And this would go on until my 50s.
Wow.
So it just was because I wasn't ready to acknowledge that I had some negative behaviors.
Interesting.
I was willing to acknowledge that maybe it wasn't perfect. Well, I'm not perfect, so I have this and I do a little of that. And until, it all hits at one time. And so it took until my 50s to really acknowledge this and really go inside and really kind of and start to figure things out. But until then, it was just up and down, high and low, always drugs, alcohol, you name it.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby. And what happened in your 50s? What made you all of a sudden decide, I got to fix this?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of things, sometimes people go into a dive, a negative space when one thing happens, right? Sometimes it could be a death. Sometimes it could be a trauma, like a rape. Sometimes it could just be a financial devastation or divorce. And sometimes that can throw you into certain negative behaviors. Well, in my particular instance, those one-offs I could get through.
Mm-hmm.
For me, in my 50s, it was my mother passed, which I was an orphan. The real estate business completely took a dive, and I was a highly successful real estate agent, but I knew how to spend a lot of money. And so I didn't save any money because I didn't really understand how money worked. And so I was at the bottom of that part where when the real estate business took a complete dive, well, I had no money either. So I was basically broke. My husband at the time left me for somebody else. I was 40 pounds overweight, and I found myself back in my 50s, drinking a lot every night and doing drugs, just again to mute myself, and actually finding a little sexual things here and there also. I mean, finding people being too risky because I just was trying to get away from all of it.
So once again,
what happened?
How come you changed? What
so
made you wake up?
I know. So I got to tell you, it was an incredible day. It was in September of 2009. I'll never forget this day. And I was actually on the floor, drunk. I'd had several martinis. Again, my husband had left me for somebody else. My finances, I didn't know if I was going to have a roof over my head in a month. My mother had passed away, and the last straw, this is all happening all together, right? And the last straw was I opened up an email that I thought was from somebody I knew, like a client or something. And there was a pictures of my husband and her together. And that pretty much, for me, 4 to 5 things just was the last straw. And I broke down literally and I just said, I can't go on. I mean, I literally was on the floor and I just can't go on anymore. I can't do this anymore. What can I do? I said, I wanted to give up. I wanted to just, I don't think I necessarily wanted to put myself in a misery, but I definitely just wanted to give up and just, forget about it. Screw it. I just can't do it anymore. And at that time, and I don't know anybody's beliefs and things, but I do have a spiritual belief. But as I sat there and I was on the floor crying my eyes out, there was this little soft feeling on my arm. And I looked over and there's my cat Hula just staring at me. And I swear to God, and whether it was my internal power or some other kind of power, but I felt this literally this energy coming through me that says, you've got to keep going. You cannot give up. You have things to do. And I love you. Please keep going. Now, let's step back. My sister was a huge mentor of mine. She was 10 years older than me, and she took care of me as a parent, but she had passed away. It was also one of the things that happened to me is she passed away many years ago, but I've always felt her by my side. And I truly believe that some way, somehow she was trying to get through to me, like, you cannot give up because you just need to take your power back. You got to stop the drinking. You've got to stop the drugs. You got to stop running around and trying to have sex with everybody that you know, just to make yourself feel good for the moment, and get your crap together. You've got to get your, and honestly, that day, there were some words that came into my mind that I wrote down, and I didn't understand them at the time, but the words were acknowledgement, forgiveness, mindset, accountability, and perseverance. And it took me a while to figure them out, but I just knew I had to take my power back. And what I did was I actually wrote down a why so strong that I would never want to go back to that. So in other words, I wrote out as I was laying on the floor, crying, drunk, looking like crap, you know, just everything bad, you know, everything was just so badly. I just never wanted to go back there. So that why has actually kept me from going back. Now, did I have a couple steps forward and one step back periodically? Absolutely. And I think that is just a life of just life. But understanding and acknowledging where my problems were. And I had to acknowledge it because coming from an alcoholic mom, you know, who didn't acknowledge it, coming from having alcoholic friends that didn't acknowledge it, I had to acknowledge the fact that I was in trouble. And if I didn't get myself cleaned up and do something right and move forward, that everything was gonna get worse and worse. And I think I was so frightened of being homeless that scared me straight almost. That was just kind of me, but I just knew that there was hope out there. I just knew that if I gave myself a little bit of grace, that I was smart, that I could do it. It may not happen overnight, but I just had to keep listening and reading my why constantly. Because when I read that, it put me right back on the straight and narrow, you know, I mean, literally, because I never wanted to be back there again. It was just a very bad day. It was one of my worst days of my life. Yet the best day of my life.
Yeah. No, I get that. And that's amazing. And you bring up a lot of the things that we've talked about over and over on the podcast. It starts with you, and it starts with you, how you feel about yourself. And, you know, you can't get clean and sober for somebody else. It has to be because you think you are important enough to be clean and sober and live a wonderful life. And you deserve that. And, you know, we hear that over and over again from those in recovery that, you know, they really have to decide for themselves that they're worth it, basically, because what did you have to go through then? I mean, here you are, you've got no job and your husband's off doing his thing. So
well, I had to go deep. I had to go so deep, and I had to acknowledge the fact that I had no self-confidence. I had to acknowledge the fact that I had no self-esteem, and that I felt that I wasn't worth it. I had to actually acknowledge it in order to move forward with it. And one of the first things I knew I had to do is get out of debt, you know, and find some money. And I literally sold everything I owned, literally, so I could live and pay that rent that next month. I literally sold, I mean, I would search in every crawl space, every pocket for coins. And literally, and they actually saved me because I came up, it was amazing how much money you can find and do and sell when you need to. But that started building a little confidence in me. I actually had to say, I had to take my head out of the sand and open the bills because I just was ignoring everything. And I just really, and at the time I didn't have the money to find a therapist or a coach or anybody. So I tried to learn a lot myself, but then I felt I needed a little bit. So I went to the library and found somebody for free, that would help me a bit. But I read books. I just really listened to my why. And even though I would have days that were down, I kind of look at my cat Hula again and say, oh, I don't want you talking to me again. So I need to keep moving forward here. So that's a little scary. But, the first step was really acknowledging. And then the second step, which is where these 5 words started coming into, I had to forgive myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had to forgive myself or give myself some grace and realize that I was human. And I had to also reach out and forgive my father, my mother, and because they have their own stories. And I had to forgive the rapist and my ex-boyfriend, way back in the day. And even though they could be dead by now, I still needed to take my power back because they were holding onto it. And I knew that I had to cut that and move forward and surround myself with positive people and really help changing my mindset. And when I surrounded myself with better people and released a lot of toxicity, I was doing myself a good deserving, knowing that I was moving forward. That gave me hope because, you start seeing people that care about you. And so, and reaching out to others. And so that really helped me. And it just, it gave me hope every single day. And I really worked on that. I mean, affirmations and everything, you name it, I worked on it.
Yep. And you then wrote a book.
I did.
Tell us
Yes.
about the book. What inspired you to do that? And
Well, I wrote the book, It's Seen and Unheard, and it's my journey coming from a little girl's silence to empowerment. And for me, it was a memoir, and it was the final release in a lot of ways. Even though I'd released so many different things, sometimes when you release what's in your heart and what's in your head out to the world, that's really, really letting go. But I've had this book on the back of my, back of the shelf for years. And I just kind of decided I'm just going to do it. And it really is a memoir of my life, but it's a memoir that I find that other women can reflect on themselves, because on my stories, there's women that can see maybe a story that they have, maybe not exactly the same, but it also, if they reflect on it, they can have hope. And that if I can do it at 56, that anybody can do it. I mean, because there is no age limit to change. There's no situation that you can't change. Is you can do it. You just have to be willing to acknowledge it and move forward. So my book really is a hopeful book in allowing women and men, some men too, to see themselves in that. And I give us some suggestions in chapters and also some work stuff in the back. But and I've had a really great positive response from it by women reaching out to me and say, you know what, I saw, it wasn't exactly, but I saw and I reflected on this, and I think I need to make some changes.
interesting.
Because maybe they were as extreme as mine.
Yep.
And maybe there was only one situation, but when you can learn to live with which what I strive for is inner peace every single day, and doing my best and kind of living in today and in gratitude, I find that I don't have the anxiety and the overwhelmness, and I've just done my very, very best. And it's turned around. My life completely turned around. My real estate business went flying high again. It's been successful for many, many years. Once I figured out that I had clients that I could deal with. And my dealing with people and observing and listening to others and letting them know they matter. Because I really believe that there's a lot of women out there that believe they're not heard, and that they're not, they're seen, but they're not heard. And a lot of that stems from a lot of the imaging coming from big companies and different things that really makes a woman especially feel less than and dismissed, and we're talked over. And I want women to know that can change. They just need to build their confidence back up. And I don't mean a brash confidence. I mean a confidence that's an inner power that makes you feel good, that moves you forward, that gives you some boundaries, and that it's okay to say no sometimes.
Yep. A certainty of self. You know,
Certainty of self.
I love all of your messages, and I know that you have a huge following on Facebook. So I know that what you say resonates with a lot of women. And, you know, as we said before the podcast, that's what this podcast is all about, is not just women per se, but to instill in people who are listening, if they have their own addiction problem, you know, there's help available and there's hope. And sometimes I think that the darkness of addiction can just lead people, whether they are addicts themselves or friends and family of addicts, to think there's nothing that can be done about it. And there always is. There always is something that can be done. And there's always help and there's always hope. And hey, if nothing else, go to Facebook and look up Patricia Love, and she can help you, because that's
absolutely
what you do.
Yeah, it's important that people understand it, no matter whether it's abuse, behavior addiction, because there's all different types of addictions. And there's, you know, and so I don't want anybody to think that, you know, well, I don't have that. Well, everybody has behaviors that maybe they can change or break that cycle.
Yep. And also, you know, so often we hear from addicts who had a really good childhood and yet for whatever reason decided to experiment and try drugs and became addicted. So my point is that if Patricia can live through the childhood and the trauma that she had, you know, you can too.
Yes, you absolutely, you just have to want to. You have to want to change. And I use that big word again, acknowledge. You just, a lot of people don't want to acknowledge their own negatives because it's really hard to be truthful with our own selves. And like, it's like, what do you mean? I don't do that. Yeah, well, yes, we do, you know, but it's so freeing once you do acknowledge it, and then you learn to forgive and then change your mindset. So it's a beautiful thing. And every day I look at life completely differently now. I have, just real quickly, I have a quote from Wayne Dyer that I love and I use daily, and I highly recommend it for anybody, is if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's helped me in so many ways, because sometimes if it's a really bad day, I'll change it up somehow and find a good thing out of it.
It's a great message. It's great. Patricia, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your story. And everybody, it's patricialove.com. And the book is Seen and, oh, sorry, I did write it down.
That's right. Seen and Unheard.
Seen and Unheard. And you can, and I'm assuming they can find your book on Amazon or anywhere.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and also my website, patricialove.com.
Anywhere you buy books. So check it out. Go to patricialove.com and check her out on Facebook too, because she's got a huge group. And that means to me that she's offering a lot to people, because she's got a lot of positive messages. So thank you again, Patricia. Really appreciate you taking time for us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. I have to repeat that quote she gave. I didn't get the name of the person, but if you change the way you look at things, the things that you're looking at will change. And that's a great message. And I hope that Patricia's interview inspired you to get help, or just maybe inspired you that hope is real. There is such a thing as hope. You can check her out at patricialove.com and check out her Facebook group. Just search for Patricia Love. And we hope you have a great week. It's the end of October. We're heading into November. I don't know what happened to this year. It went so fast. But we'll be back again next week with another interview. And once again, reach out if you need help. There's so much help available to you, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done. It doesn't matter. Just reach out for help.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.